Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show, Jacket, Cap, whatever this is. I think it's a show. I think we'll stick with that formula. Oh, blimey, am I turning into, do you know that book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat? About some neurological disorders that we can have, aphasia and all of that. There you go. And welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. I've got a great guest with me, Lucy De Silva, who has very kindly come back, even though I last time we were meant to record, I'd forgotten and I was out running. Where are you? Oh no, what have I done now? So there you go. But it's very kind of you to come back and give us another shot, Lucy. Lucy's the CEO and co-founder of Silva Wellness, which we're going to talk about, but which is, in fact, the UK's first ketamine assisted therapy service, which is very exciting for those of us who've followed the sort of trials and tribulations of trying to get all this stuff licensed. And I bet you have much more than us.
Mm,
Your poor head
mm,
must have exploded on many occasions. We'll get into
mhm.
what that means. But firstly, thanks for coming and joining us, Silva. How are you doing? Lucy, sorry. I keep
Yeah.
Lucy, not Silva.
I'm very good, thank you. No problem. No, it's fine. Yeah,
Are you
I'm very,
joining us
very
from
good.
your office or from your home at the moment?
I'm actually working from my home today. I'm very lucky that we have space at home, and I'm nice and quiet. So I'm out the back in our outhouse, so
Where
hopefully
is
won't be
home for
disturbing.
you, Lucy? Not the exact address, obviously, but the area that.
Yeah, in case someone comes knocking. I'm in Hitchin in Hertfordshire.
Great. Oh, yeah. I
Yeah,
trained
yeah.
up in Hertfordshire at the University of Hertfordshire, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. In
yeah.
the old BA design building, that hot
Oh.
building that British Airways used to have to design their planes.
Oh, right. I'm not familiar with it, but
You don't need to. So thanks for joining us. Where is Hertfordshire where you grew up? Is that your area that you're from?
no, no. I grew up in East London, actually, in Walthamstow, E17.
Oh,
Um,
down the corner from me. Down the corner from me.
oh,
I'm in
okay. Oh, I know. Yeah, yeah,
just the
yeah,
other end of the Lea Bridge Road.
yeah, yeah. No, I know. Yeah, slightly worse than Walthamstow, yeah, back in the day.
Yeah. I'm not far from Clapton, used to be called the Murder Mile in Hackney, which is literally the other end of the Lea Bridge Road. So you grew up
Wow.
around the marshes and all that sort of stuff.
Walthamstow is yeah, no, it's a bit further. Oh, what it is kind of in between, isn't it? Because you've got Leighton,
Yeah,
Leytonstone, Leighton, then Walthamstow,
yeah,
and the marshes are kind of in between all of that, isn't it? Yeah, where the train line is.
yeah.
So yeah, no, it's yeah, quite close to there.
So what was it
Yeah.
like growing up there? To sort of miss it, or are you happy to be out of it?
I've just realised that my headphones are going to die, so I'm going to actually take them off if that's all right.
That's all right. Well, carry
I've
on,
just
carry on.
just realised that they're going to hear me okay.
Yeah, got you. Can you hear us?
Good, yes, I can. Yeah, so Walthamstow for me growing up, actually, it was relatively, it was quite a rough area
Yeah,
uh, when I was growing up there. And yeah, I didn't, I don't, I mean, now it's almost like a bit hipsterish, it's quite,
it's
it's
very much so. Walthamstow Village now is a
yeah, yeah.
definite place of destination. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually quite a nice place area to live, but yeah, when I was growing up there, it wasn't great, and in fact, it kind of almost tied in with me not having the best upbringing myself either. So area around me wasn't great, and in home wasn't great either. So yeah, so Walthamstow for me it holds a lot of memories, but it's not a place I think I would live in again.
Yeah, yeah, no, fair enough, fair enough. And what sort of inspired you to move on from that, as it were, given that it wasn't a great start in life? Was it school that you were sort of attached to, or work?
Uh, it's a very interesting story, my story.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so I grew up in Walthamstow, but moved around a lot.
Yeah,
And so I lived. You probably know some of these places up near Hoe Street, near the cinema.
yeah, I do. Yeah.
my first job was working down the Walthamstow Market in one of the pie and mash shops, actually, at 13. I don't think you'd do that nowadays, but
Yeah,
yeah,
my first one was a milk round at 12 or
yeah,
13.
yeah,
Obviously you don't have those anymore. People don't have them now, do
yeah. How old were you?
12, 13,
Yeah,
similar sort of thing.
yeah,
There was no money for pocket money in my family.
yeah,
Whatever
same.
money
Yeah,
I had, I earned. That was it.
yeah, yeah, same. Yeah, so I moved around a lot. I was moved to Black Horse Road. I don't know if you
Yeah,
know Black Horse Road.
I do know.
Um,
Of
lived
course,
down there.
famous. Black Horse Road. It's
Yeah.
famous.
Yeah, lived down there, yeah, all around. And so, your question was related to, what made me kind of move away. But I actually, I
More
say,
emotionally rather than physically. I mean, I think we all do that because I grew up in a disturbing childhood without a doubt.
okay,
It was not a childhood I'd give to somebody or recommend in
right,
any way
yeah,
whatsoever.
yeah,
And my roots out of it emotionally, because when I was a working class kid up in Birmingham, coming from a violent alcoholic family, which is my background, I'm not asking for sadness, it's just what happened. My route out, there were various routes for poor white working class people in those days: army, leave, go off and get a job in a factory. And actually, at that point, school, because
mm,
education had improved and school and education was my route. And then I
mm,
got involved in the arts, and that's how emotionally I moved beyond that. And
mm.
eventually, my journey led me into psychological therapies
Sure,
through a
right,
circuitous route, and that was my
right,
route in. I'm
yeah,
just interested, like, because I'm always interested in people that may not have had, that may have had what we now call ACEs,
mm,
adverse childhood experiences, as
mm,
you know about those because you're dealing with them all the time.
mm.
What was the journey out of that, and what sort of worked for you, really?
Very quite unusual. So I grew up in an abusive household, which we can go into a little bit more detail. But for at 14 or 15, we moved to another house, and my mum and then the man that she had married, which caused us a lot of chaos in the house.
Yeah.
They decided to move out together and left me and my sister in a house together in a council house. So I was just leaving school. I was around 15, 16
Wow.
at the time. And yeah, we were left in this house to basically fend for ourselves. And yeah, so I'm a performer myself. I'm a professional singer.
Ah,
So yeah, my dream was to perform, and one thing I knew I wanted to do when I was a little girl. One of the holidays we would go to was Butlins in Minehead in Somerset.
yeah,
And when I was a little girl, I remember seeing the redcoats, and I said I knew I wanted that as my first job.
great.
Redcoat.
No,
Oh,
no. I'm just thinking, imagine you as a little girl going, "That's what I want to do."
yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
It must have been like magical for you as a kid.
honestly, like, I'd look at them and know, there was like, back in those days as well, if you were a performer, a singer, or a compere, or anyone that was a budding artist, to be a redcoat was a pretty big deal. And yeah, I made a vow to myself that as soon as I turned 18, I was going to apply to be a redcoat. And so when
Mine was getting on stage in the school play. As soon as
right,
on stage in the school play, that was it. My world transformed. Done.
yeah.
Finished.
It,
There was a new way now. There was a new way, and that was my dream. So I really identify with what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think when you are of that kind of character and you've grown up in an environment, look, it sounds like we've had similar experiences, that, when you do make that first step into that world, it's so transformational, because
Yeah,
it shows you what you can do, what you're
that's right.
capable of doing, and the spark and the light that you have inside you. It's something that feeds it, and then it grows and grows and grows. And that's what I noticed. I grew up in a very, very, very sad upbringing, and lots of terrible things happened to me. But I always did have that spark in me where I knew I wanted better. I knew I wanted more. And yeah, so at 16, going back to what I was saying, I was left in this house, and I wanted to go on to study performing arts, but because I had to work to feed myself, I found a job in a stationery company, a local envelope company, and then worked for a couple of years, and there was a lot of chaos that went in that time as well, like becoming homeless because the house got repossessed. And I was only 16 at the time, 17, and then I was waiting until I was 18 to apply to be a redcoat, and I got made homeless and then sofa surfed for a while, and eventually reached my 18th birthday, made my application, got an audition, and in those days hundreds of people were applying to be a redcoat, and went along to an audition, and a week later I got a call inviting me to be a redcoat, and I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. Yeah, life changing.
Magical story. That's really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was that like being a redcoat? Did it live up to your expectations? Did it have that?
Yeah, I still say, even to this day, it's one of the best years of my life, because it took me away from where I was living in London. It took me completely out of the environment. It gave me all that space away from my family, who were very, very toxic. And I went on my own. Obviously, I knew no one. And when I arrived, I was incredibly shy. I didn't have much self-worth at all. But being around people who were all my age, some of them had been there for a season before, so they already knew the ropes and stuff. But I just opened up like a flower, and I was put into a lot of situations where you're thrown in at the deep end all the time. There's a compere doesn't turn up and you're given the microphone. You're said, like, go and host this show, come and bring on this artist, or open up this show. And there was a lot of situations where you just had to get on with it. You didn't have a choice, and you're constantly thrust into situations where you're talking to people from all different walks of life.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, really, the diversity of people in your life, extraordinary. I still look back my days of acting, because that's what I chose, with great fondness, and it opened up my internal world. Otherwise, my internal world would have been very limited and very damaged. I'm very grateful for that, and particularly the people I met, because you really met people from all walks of life who I would not have associated with, to be honest. And that's a big breakthrough. What was next for you then, in terms of your journey and your story? You were in the redcoats for a year, and then
I was a redcoat for a year to 18 months, I believe I was there. I stayed on for a season and a bit, and then I had the taste for seasonal work, and obviously because I was a little bit of a, what's the word? Is it a nomad? Like, didn't really have a home. So for me,
why would you? Because home wasn't particularly a nice place. So
home wasn't safe. Home wasn't pleasant. It was just horrific, to be fair. But and and
have an attachment to bags at that point, because it's a similar type of thing. It was my bags were more important to me because they had my stuff in it.
Exactly.
Than any home. Do you know?
Yeah. And it's quite sad though when you think about it now, isn't it? Because for me anyway, like I literally had nothing to my name. I didn't have a home or a base to ever go back to, and I
obviously we're talking internal as well, aren't we? There wasn't a safe place there that had been placed inside you, which is what that stable home environment does for people. It places a safe space inside.
Absolutely.
So people feel safe within themselves, and then they're more resilient and able to deal with things. But you had some great survival mechanisms. I mean,
from day one, Noel, from day one, my background before that was just, I'll touch on it very quickly, and I think I will caveat it with, this probably will be triggering for some people. So I'll just very briefly say what it was that I went through. It was a severe sexual abuse, severe physical abuse, a lot of like really just strange gaslighting behavior, neglect. It was just the most horrific environment to grow up in, and no support then from my mum, who basically sided with the abuser. A reason I mention this, Noel, is because you mentioned about this sort of resilience piece that I notice now, having done a lot of work and still continue to do work on myself, because it's a never-ending journey. That I've had a thread of resilience that's run through me from my birth. This courage to want better and to speak out and to need to have justice and the truth, and that has served me. Despite me being actually back in the day, like, quite shy, relatively reserved, and always deemed as like the easy child that just didn't make a fuss, didn't say anything. I've had this lion's heart that's always like needed to roar,
That's extraordinary.
it is. And I'm so proud of myself, because I was the first one to speak out about what was happening at home. And over the years, I've been the one that's pushed for justice and pushed, and in so many different ways. So I had that inbuilt in me,
But I think it's really interesting, and I really identify with the notion of wanting justice, and it's not unusual for those of us that have experienced things that we shouldn't have experienced to have a sense of injustice, right? And you can use that very creatively, I think, which is what you're describing. So we can spend our life pining away our lives, waiting for the person who's never going to apologize to apologize. Or we can get our apology in other ways by healing ourselves, changing our lives, and doing something in the world that makes the world a better place.
Absolutely.
You identify with that, right?
Absolutely. It's that alchemization, isn't it, of the experiences that we, I guess I've learned that there is such power in being able to forgive. Now, forgiving is more for me than it is for the other person.
It's really interesting. My journey is similar, I think, around forgiveness. But I'd like to hear what you think about forgiveness, because it's a concept bandied around, and for those of us that experience extreme abuse, can be a complicated concept, I think. So what's your journey around that? I'm very interested.
It's so layered, isn't it? I think when you're abused, especially when you experience sexual abuse as a child, I definitely think it makes you lose a fragment of your soul, and it leaves a big hole in your soul. And that hole for me existed in resentment, sorrow, anger, so many things included in that. And that I lived like that for a long time, and I genuinely think a lot of because when we look at addictions and eating disorders, and certainly for me was heavily trauma related, and so I did go down that path of alcoholism, drug addiction, bulimia, anorexia, depression, depression, anxiety, all full house basically.
You didn't do it by halves, right?
What's the point? Gonna do it properly. But yeah, the forgiveness piece I didn't understand for a long time. I think when I went into rehab, which was 10 years ago, and got sober in rehab, they don't mention forgiveness early on really at all, because as you touched on, it's a tricky, especially with something like that, when that kind of behavior that happens to a child it can never be okay. It can never be okay. So I understood that forgiveness is not like you look at forgiveness as a word, but actually it can mean so many other things. And it was starting at a place where I could almost think about having an understanding of why it could have happened, and that's not justifying it. That's having an understanding of where it came from and who was involved, and kind of building on that story.
It's an understanding that empowers you as opposed to justifying your abuser. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And understanding in that, what goes in line with that is getting.
Because I remember feeling lost about that stuff, trying to understand how could you be like that? Because it would never cross my mind to
Mm,
knowingly and willingly hurt someone.
mhm.
It just I couldn't do it because of the pain I've been through. It's horrific to me to think about that. And I may be a little bit naive about my relationship to people because of that. I'm overly nice in some ways. But that's
Mhm,
okay. I don't
mhm,
mind.
mhm.
But that sense of I need to understand this was drove me
Mm,
almost insane throughout my life.
yeah. And that resonates with me as well. And I did start at a point where I would be like you. I was like, how, and sometimes even now when something can happen, I'm all about truth and all about honesty. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, why are you not being honest to me? Like, can't you just, I just find it such a simple thing to do. But I think when you're looking at that piece, for me, the understanding led me to get to a place where I could accept that it wasn't my fault. And that's the key part of it, because the blame, especially with something like that, is heavily loaded on, it was heavily loaded on me.
Yeah.
um, so that's what I mean around the understanding piece of, like, when you can get to a place where you can say to yourself, there was nothing you ever did to make it happen, or you were no part of it whatsoever. That's the start of being on a journey of some form of forgiveness.
And
Yeah.
it's really important. I think that connection with, I wouldn't use the same terms, but it doesn't matter. I think we mean the same thing. The abuser takes some aspect of one's personality and holds on to it until one forgives that aspect of that personality, then they
Mhm.
no longer have hold of it.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And then
yeah,
take it and bring
yeah,
it back into me. That was
yeah,
my experience of forgiveness, was I was forgiving me, not
yeah.
them. I was
Yes.
not trusting them.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah,
know what I mean? So I don't know
yeah.
if that thumb came up, but that's it does. It copies like thumbs down was probably the right sort of image. But
Yeah,
that leads not about trusting them because I'm now much more realistic about the abusers. Abusers are abusers. That's
yeah.
the way they are. Even if they change, if they've abused me, I don't want them in my life.
Yeah. And that sort of what you just said about that, the part that they take, it's very in line with that IFS stuff, isn't it? The internal family systems, like
Without a doubt.
they take a part, like an innocence, they take that part of us that is innocent and a child, and childlike and innocent. They take that from you when they abuse you. But that image you used just then of almost like seeking it back through the healing process and taking it back to yourself and like claiming it back.
It belongs to me. You can
Yeah,
take it off.
absolutely.
It's mine.
Absolutely. And that's not just in that kind of abuse. It's in a lot of ways as well. Like, we have a right to reclaim what we lose in our
Yeah.
childhood, through healing, through any type of healing that we seek. So we can get fragmented in a lot of ways through all sorts of different experiences. But when you start to do the healing work, and I think, again, going back to the forgiveness piece, it's when you start to take back pieces, you can build up a picture of what forgiveness looks like for you as a person.
Yeah.
So that's been my experience around that.
Wonderful, lovely. And so like you obviously go through troubled times. How could you not, given what's happened to you? You develop coping strategies around trying to manage feelings through substances, alcohol, food. I
Mm.
guess sex as well would have been in there. We don't need to go into it, but
Mhm.
that's hugely typically at
Mhm.
some point the you run out of road.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
End up in a rehab because
yeah,
you fried your brain, the
yeah,
receptors are no longer working, there's nothing
yeah.
left to sort of stimulate inside there. So you turn
Mhm.
up, you get given a message of abstinence, I guess, and recovery and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
I presume you went into some sort of structured recovery program somewhere. You don't need to talk about if you did or didn't, but
Yeah,
peer support is usually the
yeah,
methodology, and you do
yeah,
that. What was
yeah.
the next steps for you in terms of that? Now you're substance free, or managing to some extent. Generally, people manage to some extent the processes, are not completely. It's not, you
Sure.
can't do abstinence around
Yeah.
processes. You
Yeah.
learn better skills around it. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
what was the sort of you do personal therapy, I guess, as part of that process?
Yeah, yeah. So I was very lucky to go into a private rehab centre, which because I was working in corporate environment at the time, and I was lucky I had private healthcare. So I went to a private rehab in North London, and very, very lucky to have had that.
With G, I imagine.
Sorry?
Beginning with G, I imagine. We won't name them, but is it beginning with G?
No, no, the big P.
Oh, that one. Yeah, we're not mentioning them. Sorry, mate.
The big P. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, let's move on.
Yeah.
I was 12-step treatment facility. I was introduced to this concept of community, spiritual healing,
Right.
which I was like, what is this? Like, I'd never heard of this before. The 12-step program, of course. But yeah, no, you're right. I think what happens is when you are of that kind of, let's say, I
Just
guess,
to say there to people who are listening, Child
yeah,
Step isn't the only peer support. There's things like Smart, there's other groups, and now internationally you can get, there's Women in Recovery,
yeah,
there are in Ireland, there's Secular Recovery, in the UK, there's Secular Recovery. So I just want to be clear with people that what we're talking about is not a specific form, but we're
mm,
talking about the general concept of getting health and well-being through
mm,
being parts of groups of people who are
mm.
all trying through common purpose to
Right.
achieve that together.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's so many different routes, isn't there? And I think this one particularly for me, luckily,
yeah.
it worked, and I was very receptive to it.
I
And
say that simply not to challenge your experience, but just simply to say because it doesn't work for everybody. And
no,
sometimes the
it,
message is if it doesn't work for you, it's because you're not working it hard enough. That's not
No,
true.
it's not. And I do see that a lot, especially in my work over the years.
Yeah.
And it's really, I mean, when I studied my master's, it was specifically around addiction psychology. So I'd been in recovery myself for about 5 years when I started my master's, and on interest, like I'd known mostly around the 12 steps. And so they were in this course, they discussed so many, like they discussed SMART, they discussed like reducing drinking, and there were
All sorts of models, absolutely. Yeah.
so many different models, and I was really very interested but not closed off to it, because I was like, that makes sense. I see people come in the rooms and they don't connect, and that's still okay. There are other ways that people can do it, but for me this was, I think I really need complete abstinence, because I was dying through my drinking and my
Yeah.
drug taking.
Yeah.
I needed to go into a facility where I had a detox as well, because I've been drinking so heavily and for so long, and I needed
Just a
to.
note of caution to people, if you're drinking heavily and you're thinking of stopping, make sure you get medical advice.
Yes, absolutely.
Because of the physical dependence that's involved in,
Yeah,
you can end up quite seriously ill
yeah,
with alcohol withdrawal. So be very careful about that. I'm not encouraging you to carry on drinking, by the way.
yeah. No,
You need to stop, but get medical advice.
really important for people to know that, because you may get some, and look, not some people may go into the rooms, for example, and be drinking really heavily, and you just be really
People that
mindful.
don't know, the rooms means AA or NA.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I was very, very lucky to have had that experience. And yeah, I took to the program really well and got
Yeah.
myself a sponsor who is someone that guides you through the
A
12
mentor.
model, a mentor in the program. And yeah, so but like you touched on earlier, you know, I had layers of addictions, addictive behaviours, addictive, you know, it was just ran through me like the vagus nerve. And so I was relational issues and sex and love addiction, you know, codependency, so much to work through. And so when I went in and got sober, it was amazing to be introduced to that. But then when I got sober, stopped drinking and taking drugs, then I had most of my issues came to the surface because I wasn't numbing them anymore. So I actually had a short relapse about 16 months after I came out of treatment, went back into
Totally
treatment.
understandable, Lucy. I mean, seriously.
Needed
It's a bit
as
of a
well.
tsunami of stuff that you were dealing with.
Absolute tsunami is a great word, because every single day I felt like I was just like overwhelmed with trauma and memories and rumination and triggers, and it was so
It's one of
hard.
the reasons why I caution against just diving in. I know some people have to stop because they're going to kill themselves. So you're at a
Yeah,
point where
yeah.
it's an existential crisis. But actually, we can intervene sooner than that. And using harm reduction models, which you know about, we can target treatment while people are still using and help them so that they don't have that experience. Because
Yeah.
there is an issue with abstinence only approaches, and that's the issue. Is that it can be really, really tough, and relapse can be feel a lot worse than the original using, right? Because
I think that for me, now I look back in hindsight, I spent 28 days my first stint in rehab. I think I could have been in there for a lot longer. To have, you know, maybe 3 months, to really have built a structure around this abstinence approach, been protected by the nurses and the doctors and everyone in the hospital, would have served me very well. But you know, it just was what it was. And actually, I think I needed to have that.
it's possible to construct that in community settings as well. It doesn't need to be an institute.
Yeah.
So there are ways of thinking about like stepped care approaches, for example, where you can provide services to people in their own home, which predicts that drop off. And then you can, rather than people going, they go,
Exactly. Yeah.
So going to fast forward because I'm just aware of time.
Yeah.
So you go and do this MA, because your brain is working, you're in recovery, you want to learn more about it, and decide to train clinically in what you've experienced and understand it more. Is that right?
It was an MSc actually. um so I told you earlier, I didn't go to college, I didn't go to university, I didn't have
Hardly
any.
surprising, right?
No, well, clearly not. I mean, and even my GCSEs, I only walked away with about 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with my ability whatsoever.
It makes
Obviously,
right, exactly.
yeah. Obviously, the environment I was growing up in, and no support, and then I couldn't even go to college, even if I wanted to. You know, I had to work. So,
I mean, I have to say this because it's frustrating to me that none of the professionals in your life, your teachers, noticed what was going on, did something about it. How in God's name does a 16-year-old end up in that situation with nobody knowing?
nobody knows.
Absolute nonsense, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
outrageous.
Yeah.
Outrageous failure all around.
Yeah. Oh, so many.
But let's not go there. That's just me
Yeah.
being angry, right?
Yeah. No, I hear
So you
you.
go and do this MSc.
Yeah.
What's motivating you to do that? What was the sort of your thinking about that point?
Yeah. I always knew I wanted to work. I wanted to help people. I always knew I wanted to sing and I wanted to help people. Those
It's
two things.
extraordinary thinking about it because, like, after what's happened to you, wouldn't you just want to hate the world and everybody and see them all dead? I mean,
I
seriously.
think so, right? But I
Right.
mentioned earlier of having this lion's heart. It's been who I am, and in fact, I am a Leo, which also helps. So it's just been a drive for me from as long as I can remember. Always wanting better for myself,
Yeah.
always.
But now wanting better for the world.
And now wanting to transmute my experience and give that back to other people, and help people, because I truly believe we can only take people as far as we have been, as a therapist.
The sort of wounded healer approach.
100%.
Right.
So yeah, I knew I wanted to do that, and when I saw the therapist in the treatment center, I was given, it planted a seed for me, and I was like, these therapists, like, what they do is unbelievable. Like, they save people's lives, and I was so inspired by it. So I came out the first time, didn't do anything about it because there was so much for me to do to make amends, and to, I'd lied a lot at work, I'd taken a lot of time out, I had to rebuild a lot in that 16 months. So I couldn't focus on anything else other than getting some of my life back together. And then I had a relapse. So it was serendipitous that I didn't explore anything in that time, because also I wouldn't have been ready either. Fresh out of rehab, I was still probably mad as a box.
Like what, Lucy? It doesn't stop a lot of people trying, though. Do you know what I
No,
mean?
I know.
And it is a problem in the field that
I
you're
know.
allowed into this type of training far too soon.
I know.
Like, it's too much pressure. But anyway, that's another show.
Yeah. And luckily I had enough of an insight to realize that myself,
Yeah.
which but so and then I had a relapse. I was back in treatment, and I spent that next year and a half really focusing on, well, the sex and love addiction side of things, and bringing that into my recovery, looking at the relational stuff, not seeking out a relationship, just focusing on myself. And so and then, not where are we now, about maybe 4 years into my recovery, and that's when I started to explore the study. I had a friend who'd done the master's course, or was doing the master's course at London South Bank, which is where I went to university. And I said, oh, I'd love to, I want to be a therapist. I don't know where to start. And she said to me, why don't you, this is the professor that heads up the course at the university. Why don't you get in touch with her, see what she says? And I was like, oh no, I couldn't, like, all that stuff. What if she laughs at me? What she thinks that I'm, who am I to approach a university? And she said, just do it honestly. Like, trust me, you'll really like her. She'll be really lovely. At least she'll give you some advice about how to go about it. So I got in touch with her, and she said, yeah, come in. And I was really surprised. I was like, you invited me in to see you, like this, like,
It's always really amazing when people like that do that, right?
so
Genuinely open-hearted, like, no, of course you're exactly the sort of person I'd want to meet.
just blown away immediately, where I was like, oh my God, you're even inviting me into a university,
When we're off the show, I'll tell you how I got on my training, because it's a similar type of story. It's
okay,
like,
okay.
yes.
Okay, yeah, so that little one, the little one inside me, still didn't believe that she could do it.
Exactly right.
So she invited me in, and I still just thought, she's just going to say, do this little college course, get your foot on the ladder. So I came in, and she said, oh, she honestly, you should have seen her, and she didn't look like a professor at all. She had mad hair. And she just scatty all over the place, like, wonderful, just friendly, warm woman. And she started talking to me. She said, oh, why don't you tell me a bit about yourself, your experience, why you're here, what do you think you could bring to the field? And so I was like, oh, okay, it felt like an interview. So I was, just talking about myself, and I walked away thinking, oh, that was nice, maybe she'll just give me some advice. The next week they sent me an offer letter to come on course, and I was like, what is going on? I honestly thought it was a mistake. A master's course. I didn't even have a college degree. I didn't have college qualification. I didn't have a bachelor's. And she said to me, when I asked her, I said, why did you, how has this happened? She said, well, we have a small number of people we invite on that we see can bring so much to the field, and you're one of them, and she just must have seen that in me.
It's an important life lesson in that story, I think. I mean, there's a thing in universities now called accreditation prior learning. So you don't need academic qualifications, your life circumstances. There's that thumb again. I have to keep my hands down. I don't know how you turn that off. But also universities do like people who've got a bit of life experience who, when they do something, they commit themselves to it because of their life experience, and that's fair enough. But also, I think the lesson is you'll miss all the goals you don't take the shot.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
really will,
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
never know, do you?
Yeah, I learned that from that experience, and I do that now. I just go, well, why?
These people that went to Eton and stuff like that, that's all they're taught. Have confidence.
Right, right. That makes
It's not the
sense.
knowledge base. It's not anything else. It's just go for it. Have a look at Johnson, right? Seriously, that's all
I
he was taught.
mean, these people do just go for it, don't
They
they?
just do. Like, it's
And,
really not.
sometimes not great consequences
Oh
as
well, there you go. In your case, we got something good out of it. So you complete the course. Again,
well.
I'm aware of time. We're going to run out of time. I want to get to the ketamine.
Yeah.
You start practicing
Yeah.
again. Yeah,
Yeah.
seeing
Yeah.
people,
Mhm.
you're dealing with trauma because you've learned lots of trauma skills, and you're working with people at reducing their using,
Mhm.
helping them do less harm to themselves and others, and maybe getting to recovery for some people.
Mhm.
When did you come across the sort of psychedelics, ketamine assisted work? Because that's really interesting in the context of somebody who's involved in abstinence-based recovery as well, because there's a whole set of politics around that as well about
Mhm.
using ketamine in particular, which is a party drug that people use, and people go and get treatment for misuse of ketamine, for example. So,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
can you just like headlines, and then I want to talk about the treatment itself. So, what
Yeah.
was headlines and the journey to that point?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a wonderful story, but I won't go too much into it because, yeah, like I'm aware of time. But like you mentioned about the 12-step model, which is abstinence based, and after about 6 years in my recovery, I was hitting a bit of a wall, and and I started thinking like, what do I need to do now? What's the next step? And I started getting that in the medicine community, in the psychedelic world, they call it that, they say that the medicine starts to call you. And so
Okay.
I started, have you heard that term
No,
before?
no, no, it's new to
Yeah.
me. It's really interesting.
Yeah, the medicine starts to call you. And what I noticed was there was things coming to my peripheral about ayahuasca and documentaries about psilocybin. And,
Yeah.
there was more and more things coming through in the UK as well about that stuff. And so I started looking into it, and I was fascinated. And actually I made a decision to have an experience myself, which was with a very small dose of psilocybin, but also in conjunction with holotropic breath work, which is when they're combined is, I mean, mind-blowing experience still now. Very, very a microdose of psilocybin and breath work just blew my mind. And that's what started me on my journey of exploring and learning, and then studying, and then gaining qualifications, and then practicing. And that's how it went for me. And I've also had a number of different psychedelic experiences with different psychedelic medicines, because I believe you have to know what these psychedelics do to be able to be a practitioner. I really believe that. It's so complex, and such a deep, profound experience that you're going to need to know what it feels like to be able
Going
to.
to do a health and safety thing here because it's really important. So, first of all, people should know that we're talking about micro dosing,
Yeah.
not talking about going down Camden and buying a bag of mushrooms from a bar,
Oh God, no.
right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about
No.
stuff that are under controlled circumstances.
Yeah.
People should also understand that in the UK at the moment, there are strict laws around this. And if you break the laws, you might cop a feel from a copper,
Mm.
and be in serious problems. If you go to somewhere like the US, the laws are different, and
Mm-hmm.
you have lots of people who are well qualified and well trained
Mm.
to assist people.
Yeah.
Psychotherapists who are trained to assist
Yeah.
people who are having microdoses of these under controlled and contained situations. That's what we're talking about. We're
Yeah.
not talking about going down on Friday night and just K-holing away.
Oh,
Not,
absolutely.
it's a world away from that. So
Yeah.
the psychedelics, as I understand them, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, the
Mhm.
psychedelics allow for people to touch upon experiences safely with
Yeah.
a therapist who is appropriately trained and qualified, because it allows those areas of where trauma's locked us off
Mm.
accessible in a relationship with somebody else. It relaxes us enough, or it opens our mind enough. It
Yeah.
allows new neural pathways to emerge. That's
Yeah.
sort of how I understand it. Is that anything like correct?
You could do my job, Noel. You're that was spot on. Yeah, basically what you just said, and when you're talking about, there are two different routes of working with psychedelics. So there's the clinical psychedelic assisted therapy, but then also you get the sort of like a ceremonial way of working with the psychedelics, which is essentially in like it's more like traditional shamanic shamanism, like, and that, there's a lot of places that are popping up that is quite, people aren't trained and it's dangerous, and you have to be very, very mindful of that. Now,
I've had a patient literally go down Camden, get a bag of stuff, end
it,
up in Homerton Hospital,
no, okay, yeah,
be on
that's it.
poison. So
So
I'm really
worrying.
clear with people. You don't do that.
No, no way, no way. If you have to be very, 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 very careful. In Portugal, there are a lot of places that are
Oh, is
now,
it? Because
yeah,
they
Portugal.
decriminalised.
Yeah, Portugal is
Years. I hadn't thought about
yeah,
Portugal. You don't have to go
yeah,
that far,
Portugal.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the sort of clinical psychotherapy in conjunction with psychedelics, yeah, you're right. It what it does is if we're talking about ketamine, for example, it works on a part of the brain that, when someone is triggered by a trauma, let's say,
Yeah.
if you're in psychotherapy, someone's triggered by a trauma, it's very difficult for them to go into that memory and to process it and to work through the feelings. It,
Yeah, because
it,
they
it
may have intrusive thoughts.
yeah,
They may
yeah,
disassociate, or almost certainly will disassociate as a
yes, yeah.
defense from any sort of relationship. So you can't do the psychotherapy because that bit of the brain is shut off, right?
Absolutely. And the ketamine helps to dull that down, for want of a better word.
Yeah, no, it's
So
a good way of describing it.
it allows the material to come forwards and for it to be processed for probably the very first time in the person's life. And that's very transformational for people, because they've been traumatized by these memories and by these things that happened for so long. And I've heard people say during a session and then thereafter as well that it's the first time they've ever approached that memory, or that has come forward for them, and they've not had a massive trauma reaction or gone into the storm, as we maybe call it. And then in integration as well, which is the therapy that is usually a day to 2 days after
Yeah,
it, so they also process it more succinctly as well, because they remember, but they don't get as triggered, because the ketamine continues to work as well for two
yes,
to
that's
three
right.
days
Yeah, it's
after as
extraordinary
well.
how long it goes on for.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
also quite quick as well, isn't it? Because you can have like 3 or 4 sessions, sometimes just one session, but it's like you're talking about a few sessions. You're not talking about years or even months of work as such. The psychotherapy might take longer, but the
Yeah,
actual ketamine assisted is quite quick, right?
is quick. So when we're talking about the lozenges, a lozenge session, usually you're usually in the medicine for, I'd say, a 50 minutes to an hour, sometimes shorter for some, sometimes longer, depending on like someone's how they metabolize the medicine.
Yeah.
But the actual session, let's say, where it's an hour, and you can feel the effects for a little while, but you're looking at like 2 to 3 hours and a person is out of it, that they're out of the medicine, and they're fine, and they're back. They'll be probably a bit vulnerable, but yeah. And then it what it does is it allows the brain to stay malleable as well, so that those
Yes.
new ways of thinking and
The
behaving.
neuroplasticity is available.
It's fantastic. Like the changes I've seen in people is just profound, and I've done it myself. So I know how it feels, and yeah, I've
And
experienced
it's
it.
relatively new because up until recently, these medicines were illegal. You weren't allowed to
Yeah.
prescribe them, but now ketamine is legal in various forms, right? But it's again, I have to emphasize to people, this is not the same as buying something on the street.
No,
Don't do that.
no.
I'm very excited that your clinic exists because there's been a big gap in treatment in the UK for a long time now. And I'm hopeful. The other thing about ketamine, which is really interesting, I'm wondering why it was first chosen, because I think others will come. But ketamine is really good for treatment-resistant depression as well, not
It
just
is.
trauma. So tell me a bit about that as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so so most of the clinical studies that I think are the reason why it was legalized for prescription, but it is still deemed as off-label as well, by the way, is a controlled drug. So there still are
Like the
limitations.
ADHD medications,
Yes,
control.
yes,
I mean, because
yeah.
essentially they are amphetamine. That's
Yes,
it.
absolutely. Yes. So there is precautions that need to be taken around the medicine, of course. But so a lot of the trials that have been done have been around treatment-resistant depression. So the success has been seen in the changes of people who have tried numbers of different SSRIs, which is antidepressants. But as those trials have developed, they've brought more participants in who then have PTSD and then have eating disorders and also addiction. So the treatment-resistant depression was the kind of like the foundation where it started, because that's where it was noticed in people when they weren't even doing their clinical trials. So someone came, for example, anecdotally, someone came into hospital to have treatment for something, but they'd had a ketamine IV as an anesthetic,
Yeah, that's right.
and they'd noticed difference in their moods. And they'd come in hugely depressed and left, not completely better, but a lot better than they were when they came in. So they started to think there's got to be something in this. So that's where that all started.
And it's
Yeah.
also very science-based. And I mean, I have to say, I'm not a spiritual doodad person. That's not where I go. So, if you ask me to go to Peru and see a shaman, I'll be walking in a different direction. But there's a strong brain science basis
Yes.
to this, which is
Yeah.
about that plasticity of the brain,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the brain becomes shut down due to and poor old Freud was actually right about this, that it's inflammation. It's all about inflammation. It's about reduction of inflammation, and it's the allowance of interpersonal relationship into areas of functioning that were previously shut off from that. That's what depression is. That's what trauma is. It's the calcification of processes, as opposed to what our brain wants, which is to be flexible, developing, attaching, learning, and it produces that capacity, doesn't it? And quite radically so as well, from my understanding.
Very quickly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And actually, if we're going to look at it in a philosophical way as well, what you've just described is this is disconnection.
yeah,
And that's what it encourages the opposite. Those connections, those synapses, those neural pathways to come back together and form new patterns that are healthy, and decalcify all those things. And in a very medical way, but then also in a very kind of psychotherapeutic way as well. It's like encouraging. That's what we do as well at our centre. It's a very holistic approach. We
yeah,
try to stay from the clinical. I mean, there is a clinical element to it. There always will be, but we try and make it as humanistic as possible, as connection based as possible.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I like the fact that you describe it as a wellness-based service. And wellness, of course, is really important, I think, and that encapsulates that holistic approach. We are at the end, unfortunately. I could go on for days with you, to be honest. And another thumbs up.
Thumbs up again.
How does that get turned on? So what's your website? Tell us about your website and how people get hold of you and your services.
Yeah, so we're at www.silva, Silva wellness.com. And when you go on to our website, there's lots of information about what we do and how we go about doing it. The other services we offer as well. We do a lot of breath work. We do community focused projects. It's a whole, we've got a wellbeing cafe on the ground floor, so we'll welcome people in, whatever it is that you're looking for. That we hosted on on Thursday last week an open house for the mental health, sorry, it was Mental Health Awareness Day on Thursday last week, and we had an open house, and everything was for free, and people came in and had breath work and gathered in community, and that's what we're trying to emphasize as well, the importance of connection.
Well, I'm definitely going to pop down and use your cafe, I'm telling you.
Oh yeah, I'm coming for a cacao, a nice cacao.
I will, definitely.
Be very welcome.
Is that a Highland cacao?
A what? Sorry.
A Highland cacao. No, sorry, the joke. Highland cow. No, 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 no.
No, it's yeah. Do you know what cacao is?
It's chocolate.
Yeah, it's delicious. Anyway, yeah,
chocolate.
come in and have one, and I'll make one.
I will do. All right. All right. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. People can go onto the website. I've looked at it. It's a beautiful website, by the way.
Thank you.
I love it. It's really nice. I love the color scheme on it as well. It's very comforting.
Thank you. Yeah, my husband designed that actually. He'd like to know that. Yeah, I'll let him know.
Good job. It's really good. It's really good. It's really warm, welcoming. I like the style of it. It's very friendly. So do need to finish, unfortunately. So I would encourage people to reach out. It's sort of a really broad range of services, which in some ways is reflective of your own personal journey into health and well-being, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And it comes from that experience, lived it. This is what works.
Yeah.
Background. And for people who may have sort of been triggered by some of the words, it's like take a look at Lucy. Recovery is possible. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
And don't give up on yourself. Have that lion's heart.
That's it. That's the one.
You stay there. This is so lovely to have you on. Thanks. I hope everybody enjoyed that. Do reach out. You can message me 07506 319 745 if you've got questions. And I'm sure there's a contact form on Lucy's website as well, which I'm sure you'll be able to get through to them there. Never give up on yourself is the story. Fantastic for you all to be here, and I'll see you all at the next show. So bye-bye for now.